Okay, please remember to keep your phones off and stay seated during our speaker. Now please help me enthusiastically welcome our speaker, Tim.
My name's Tim and I'm alcoholic. And Joey, don't worry, none of us can say anonymity when we get here, so nobody can. It's Thursday, St. Patrick's Day, and I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Prescott, Arizona speaking. What the hell went wrong? You know? This was not my plan, just so everybody knows. I never intended to end up in rooms like these. You know, Patrick asked me to do this last week, and in the first, initially, before I even had a chance to think, I said yes, because that's what I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous. And before I do this, I want to welcome the new people and the visitors and the people who picked up chips. My current sobriety date is May 22nd of 2009. My first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting was sometime in August of 1986. Just so you know, there's been a few. I've stood up a few times. So I said yes, and then the first thought in my head was, fuck. I don't normally come to this meeting that he asked me, and why did I show up tonight? You know what I mean? If I wouldn't have come like I normally don't come, he would have never asked me, and I wouldn't be doing this. And I say that kind of jokingly, and here's the thing, I've listened to speakers through tapes, and I go to Phoenix pretty regularly to hear speakers. I've always been really impressed with people who can carry a message of depth and weight in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've heard, one of the things that when I'm asked to do this that I'm apprehensive about is I can tell my story and I can tell the details, but I have a really hard time sharing what it was like, what it meant, how I felt, the loneliness, because I stuffed, and I don't say I stuffed, I just didn't feel, and I've been sober for almost 13 years, and I still have a hard time with that. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is convey what it was like without going into too much of the details, but in the hopes that somebody will relate, because I had kind of, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous via a treatment center, and because I had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was hearing these commercials on the radio on these runs that I was having, and I was looking for something. I was looking for a way out. I just didn't know what it was, So I had been coming to meetings for a little while, and but not staying sober. And I think it was like a Friday or something. I was at a meeting, and these group of people were going to it's called Serenity in Yosemite. It's a conference, and it was in November in Yosemite, California, and they asked me if I wanted to go. And I had a down sleeping bag that I had stole from a church when I was like 12 that I figured was going to keep me warm, on that cold November ground in Yosemite. And I went up, and I can't find the speaker. Like, I've looked online to figure out who that speaker was. I can find who spoke in that conference in 1987. I can find, but not in 1986. That experience, and with a couple other things, I stayed sober for a while after that. So I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is there's some power to that. So anyhow, I'm gonna start at the beginning. I was born at a young age, like most of us are, and unfortunately, I didn't carry around a notepad, taking notes about what it was like, so that I could share it with you, and you know what I mean. There are certain things that I feel like were fundamental in forming who I was. I have 3 sisters. We are all within 5 years of each other, so my parents, were 17 when they got married. My oldest sister was born 9 months and 4 days later, and we're all really close within 5 years. And my parents, I don't ever remember them being together. They split up before, so my mom raised 4 kids, and she was young. And one of the things I remember is, and I remember this because my mom told me, I have a son was born when I was about a year and a half sober the first time, and I was calling him Little Man. And she's like, don't do that. When my parents split up, I became the man of the family. You know, when I was 4, maybe 5, my dad stopped hugging me and we shook hands and we had our own handshake. And all of the adults and everybody was, you know, I was the man of the family. And I don't think I took that, you know, I didn't think about that until my mom said something to me later on about that. So that was one thing, you know, being raised by, you know, essentially 4 mothers. There was some benefits to that. But, and then another thing was, you know, when I was in 2nd grade, I was identified as gifted. And I've since come to find out that I'm either a really smart, stupid person or I'm a really dumb, smart person. But the idea that somebody was going to identify me as gifted was, you know, but that singled me out. And we moved, and I was placed in a school, and I all but stopped going to school in 3rd grade, you know. And I will say this too, you know, I am very much a child of the 70s. My dad was at Altamont, and if you know what Altamont was, that's where the Rolling Stones thought it'd be a good idea to have the Hells Angels do security, and it didn't go well. You know, they'd done that in the UK before, and the Hells Angels in England are a little bit different than the Hells Angels were in the Oakland, California area in the late 60s. But my dad, that was kind of my dad's scene, and you know, I remember hitting power hitters with my dad when I was 4. You know, drinking was not, you know, my dad was a musician, you know, like party, you know, drinking, and that was just kind of what it was like when I was growing up. You know, my mom says when I was 4, she would go find me underneath our apartment complex smoking cigarettes with the teenagers. You know, I was always out just kind of doing my own thing. And I remember 2 occasions when I was young getting drunk, and I don't know which one was first. One was on New Year's Eve and one was in the summer, so I know they were different times. These were both up in Oregon. I think the New Year's Eve one was the first time, and I was probably 7. And I remember I had a cousin, Butch, and all the adults, you know, they had a party and they'd all gone out to the bar, and we were left alone. He has 2 sisters and I have 3 sisters, and him and I. I remember seeing a bottle. I remember Old Timer whiskey that stood out to me, and I remember drinking it. And then I remember chasing one of his sisters and being pushed down the stairs. And I remember the effect, but it wasn't like it was later on. I blacked out. I puked. You know, I have some vague recollections of my Uncle Rich holding me over the toilet. And it wasn't like I'm going to do this every day. But when I look back at my drinking, I took every opportunity that presented itself, I drank. And I will say this without hesitation, I loved to fucking be intoxicated. You know what I mean? And that never stopped being the case. You know, it's not like I came into Alcoholics Anonymous because I couldn't get drunk anymore. I loved being drunk. And I would go to any lengths to do that, you know. So, you know, my mom was prone to depression. So we raised ourselves. You know, I have a sister that when she was 15, she got pregnant. And the same year, my 13-year-old sister went to visit a friend, and she never came home. And I'm 11 at this time, and my mom's mother, my grandmother, was dying of cancer. And that's when it really, for me, took off. You know, I'd always hung out with older people, and I think I'm in 5th or 6th grade, and I started drinking regularly at about 11 or 12 years old. And it was, you know, mostly weekends when, you know, shoulder tap and whatever was the cheapest booze that we could get, we would drink until we couldn't drink anymore. And on the weekdays, it was, you know, smoking pot. And if I could drink in between then, I would drink in between then. And I will say, you know, I got to Alcoholics Anonymous the first time when I was 17, and I used to really, there wasn't a lot of young people then, and I would hear people talk from the podium about, you know, being young and golly gee, you know, it's great that you're in Alcoholics Anonymous and you don't have to do the things that we did, you know what I mean? And it would really piss me off. But on the flip side of that is I felt that same way about most of the young people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, what'd you do? Drink a few too many drinks and mommy caught you? You know what I mean? I was very judgmental. You know, I was in treatment when I was 17, and I was the only person there that was voluntarily there. And I don't know what happened. From the time I was 11 until I was 17, you know, I stopped going to school in 6th grade. I flunked 7th grade because I wasn't there. I didn't go to school the second year of 7th grade. I have one high school credit because I sat through an orientation for independent studies. So it wasn't like I drank in between life. That was my life, you know. And here's the thing, I don't know what happened, you know. I'm not gonna talk a lot about drugs, but they do relate to my story in regards to my alcoholism. And I did drugs. I did drugs sometimes to enhance my drinking. I did drugs sometimes to prevent me from drinking. But I very much know that I would not have made it to Alcoholics Anonymous at 17 without, you know, sticking needles in my arm at 13 years old and running that kind of thing and getting arrested and doing that, you know. But I will say this, you know, so when I was about 16, I started wanting to quit. I just couldn't keep doing what I was doing, living the life that I was living. And I didn't know anything else. I had no point of reference for what, you know, the book says that, you know, this is, the alcoholic life is the only normal life that, you know, I always misquote the book when I'm trying to share it from up here, but the life that I had was the only normal life that I could have ever known. It seemed normal to me, you know. And I don't know how long it was. I think it was probably 6 months or a year where I would go on these runs and I would come home and I would hit my knees and beg and plead to this God that I absolutely hated for relief. And then wake up the next day or whatever, go back at it. And this was a cycle that went on, you know, however long it went on. And like I said, I started hearing these ads on the radio for spin dry treatments, you know, so that's what I did. And I will say, you know, I thought I was going to get some bit of information. I don't know what I thought. It sure wasn't what I what I found. You know, it wasn't. I had no clue that it was going to be carting, you know, getting into the van and going to AA meetings and listening to people share. But there was, you know, there was something about what I heard in these rooms that I found that I related to. So like I said, you know, it took a few months, but in November of '86, you know, I got sober. I had a sobriety date for 8.5 years. And so I started drinking again in sometime in the summer of 1995. And in that time, you know, I worked the first 9 steps as thoroughly as I was capable of doing. I did an honest inventory. I went and made amends to people that I had robbed, to stores that I had robbed. You know what I mean? Family, I did everything possible that was in front of me that I could do to right my, you know, the wrongs of my past. And I got the result, you know, and unfortunately for me, and I say this, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous works. and I got the relief, you know, and I won't go on into this too long, but in that time, you know, I learned how to be an adult, how to show up to work every day. I became a father at about 1.5 years sober, and I was a good father. You know, I volunteered in my son's kindergarten class. I coached his Little League teams. Like I said, I stopped going to school in 6th, 7th grade. I started going to college, you know, which was a huge, huge deal for me because I always thought people like me, that was an impossibility. You know what I mean? That was just, nobody in my family did. My parents didn't graduate from high school. None of my sisters had graduated from high school. The idea that I could do something like that was miraculous, you know, if I'm gonna be dramatic. But the person that left Alcoholics Anonymous and the person that came in were not the same people. That's the point I'm trying to convey. And unfortunately, what happened, I think, you know, in hindsight, is I was very active in a home group, and I had service commitments. And I will say this, the one thing that's always lacked from my recovery is sponsorship, is 12-step work. But I can see now where it wasn't just 12-step work, it was 10 and 11 and 12, that because I had gotten some relief and I had gotten some things going in my life, I would show up and be visible, but that was it. You know, I was getting the gratification or the whatever it is by getting a life, by going to school, by, having a job, paying my bills, being a upstanding member of society kind of thing. And I'm a firm believer in, relapse isn't spontaneous. I didn't just drink out of the blue. It was a process, like recovery is a process. It probably started a couple years before I actually drank. And it was sitting in meetings, and it was taking inventory, and it was, I remember very clearly, like, people with 20 years that were showing up to meetings every day and being very active. I was like, what's wrong with you? Like, get a life. You know what I mean? That's the attitude that I have, and I wasn't sharing that with anybody. I was sponsored, but I would probably just talk about the problems with my girlfriend and school and all of this superficial crap. You know what I mean? And I look back, and that's just the way it was. I don't know that I had the. I don't know. I mean, that's just the way it was, and eventually, through a series of events, it seemed like a good idea to take a drink, and it was like, I'm gonna probably on some level thought, I got sober young. It was maybe a overcorrection. I didn't have the skills and the life experience that I've gotten from Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm gonna go do my own thing now. Thank you very much. I love what you guys have given me, and it's funny because I've sat in bars years after this, and 12-step people. Go to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the greatest fucking thing you can, you know what I mean? It'll save your life, you know what I mean? But I was like done with it. And so I went to a bar with a friend who I'd been sober with and had a cocktail. We had one drink, and I had moved out. Me and my girlfriend had split up, and I was sleeping on my friend's couch. And I remember waking up the next morning in utter terror. Utter terror. What the hell did I just do? And then it was, well, this is it. This is what we're doing now. Let's go, you know what I mean? And I honestly thought I was going to be able to practice principles in all my affairs. And I introduced myself as an alcoholic, and I haven't wanted to drink for a long time. I suffer from alcoholism, and there's a big difference when I say that. And I didn't believe that for a long time, even this time in sobriety. I didn't really believe that I fit what the book talks about, And I've been so critical of so much of what transpires here in the book. And it's not like I haven't loved it, but yeah, I've been a very critical. Sometimes I feel like what I want to do when I share is like, this is a cautionary tale of how not to go about sobriety. So I started drinking again in '95, and the wheels didn't come off overnight. And that's, probably too bad, because had they, I might have come back right away. But it was a process. And before I knew it, I don't say it was too late, but I was fully immersed in that, And I don't know what happened. I didn't acquire, I had plans on going to law school. That never happened. I did graduate from college. I was a couple years into it when I started drinking, and I was able to graduate. And then I worked for a year, and then I went to grad school. And I went to grad school for a year. And it was in that time where it just completely fell apart. And I was actually student teaching in a classroom, and I had a week solo at one point. And I came back the day after that week was over and was asked to leave. And I could tell by the look on the kids' faces when I was walking in there, like, what the hell is he doing here, And the teacher, I was just a wreck, and they didn't want me anywhere near those kids, you know what I mean? And I would go home and drink and do a line, and you know what I mean? And it didn't seem like that just seems like normal kind of, this is what we do. So what I can say is, it's never been a jail cell. It's never been an eviction. It's never been loss of a job that has prompted me to seek recovery. And all those things happened, in 5 years, I think, before I got sober. So in 2004, I was squatting in a house, just waiting for the sheriff to come, physically remove me. And my mom, who was in Phoenix, and my sister, who lived a few hours north, they came and loaded all my stuff into a truck and relocated me. You know, I'll say this, I've never been homeless. I've lived in my truck. I've stayed at my sister's house. I've stayed on friends' couches. You know what I mean? Like, if it weren't for family, my life would be a lot different. So I was relocated up to a really small town in Northern California. There's more bars than there are stoplights. And I spent the next 5 years basically just isolated, alone, and drinking, and doing other things to facilitate that. When I was 16, I got really sick. I know now it was Hep, and it's not Hep C because I've gotten tested for it since then, but I didn't know what it was. And that was, I just knew I started pissing root beer brown and shitting yellow, and I went and stayed at my cousin's house for a couple weeks, and just got through it and went back to, around 2000, when I'd been drinking for a couple years, Hep C became a huge kind of awareness, and I was still kind of connected to enough people in Alcoholics Anonymous that I knew it was rampaging through there, and I was terrified that that's what I had, and I couldn't stop drinking, and I didn't get tested for it until I was 10 years sober. I was terrified, that was the deal. So one of the reasons I started doing drugs again was because it curtailed my drinking because I couldn't stop drinking, Anyhow, so I'm up there for, like I said, 5 years. I don't drink socially. It's like I'm hiding, and one of the only, so I've been up there for a few years and working for a contractor, and there's a plumber on most of the jobs that we would work on, and I would overhear him talking to his apprentice, whatever, and I knew he was in recovery. And I made the mistake of telling him that I had been in recovery at one point, because he never left me alone after that. And I would, try to keep my head down in my eyes, and, and I love Mike, and Mike saved my life. I don't know how much longer it was, but I had a period in 2007 where I thought I was done. I'm just so tired of doing this. And the only way that I can equate this is, I've always felt like I'm trying to outrun something, and sometimes it just catches up. And it's not like, I don't know if it's a moment of clarity, but it's such an emotional thing. And I love, I remember when I was, 3 or 4 months sober, being at a meeting, and this girl was sharing, and she drank, she was a housewife, drunk, no similarities. And she told my story through her feelings. And this is where I get frustrated, because I don't know how to convey to you that quiet desperation that I could just stuff down most of the time and just pretend it didn't exist, and sometimes it would just be there. And there was a point in 2007 where I called up this guy, Mike. I hadn't been to work in a few days, and crying, and I need help, and and he called my boss and said, hey, Tim's gonna come work for me. And Mike picked me up every morning and drug my ass out of bed, and I wasn't a plumber, I had no idea, and paid me money to go sit in his truck and go do jobs, and I did that for about 6 months with him, and we went to some meetings, and but to be honest with you, I knew I was not ready to do this deal again. I needed a break, and that was in May, and me and my son had planned a trip to the East Coast for November, and I think I stayed sober for that. We were going to go to some hockey games and go to DC and New York, and on the airplane, the lovely stewardess asked me if I wanted a cocktail, and I said no, and she said, I'm buying. I said, okay. Yeah, and so for about 1.5 years, I became what was something I'd never really been before, kind of a periodic, where I would go on these runs. I could go to, there was a bar that I drank in, Al's Redwood Room. And sometimes I'd go there, and there was a Thai food place. There's Al's in a Thai food place, and I'd order Thai food and maybe get a beer. And sometimes I'd go home, and sometimes it's 3 or 4 days before I'm home, But I had it 1.5 years of that. There's some things in the big book that need no definition. And the first time I heard the term pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, I knew what that meant. I knew in my soul what that meant. And that's what I would experience, And it was an ongoing kind of thing. And that's what I did for another year and a half. And then fast forward May 21st of 2009, I was working for myself. Me and my ex-brother-in-law were just doing side jobs and, was working. And I went to Al's and I knew the guy that worked at the door. And I had something to deliver to him. And he had said something about me being there the previous weekend. And I said, I wasn't in here. And he said, oh yeah, you were, and blah, blah, blah. Now I've always known when I black out, like I don't remember this night, but I was having blackouts that I wasn't even aware that I was having. I left the bar, I don't know, 7 o'clock or whatever, 8 o'clock, didn't stay, went home. Had no idea that was going to be my last drink, So I went home and I don't know what happened between 10 o'clock that night and 6 o'clock in the next morning, but I was not able to sleep. There were some other things that I was doing that I had stopped doing that were affecting my physical behavior. But I had this moment where I understood in my soul that I was going to get to the end of my life, and what a pitiful life it had been. You know what I mean? I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it was just unacceptable to keep hiding, to keep. So I just went through this. I consider it kind of like a living hell that night. And my sister, whose house I was staying in, but she had moved out. She would bring her dog over in the morning and drop it off. And for some reason that morning she came in, and I just came unglued and just, and I went to a meeting that night, and I got a sponsor that night, and I met with that sponsor the next morning, and I haven't had a drink since then, or any other mind-altering chemical. And that was May 22nd of 2009. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I go to a meeting. There's 5,000 people in this town, and there's 8 people. And then I go to another meeting, and the same fucking 8 people. I was at a meeting one time, and it was a noon meeting, and this guy took a year chip, and I kid you not, somebody asked him how he did it, and he said, I smoked a lot of weed. You know what I mean? This is Mendocino County, California, Humboldt, Mendo. You know what I mean? When I moved to Arizona about 10 months later, I had 3 pounds of weed that I had to get rid of. But it's like, that's just kind of the culture up there. But my point is I was getting sober, and I was fucking miserable because I had been to Alcoholics Anonymous, where we would go, like my home group, when I was sober the first time, we had noon meetings, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, midnight meetings. So conceivably, I could spend my whole day in fellowship. And sometimes I did. We were out till 4 a.m. just fellowshipping, talking shit. But just, I have a friend, Craig, who my son's middle name, I named my son's middle name after him. I was 18, 19, and he was 21, and we were at a Caro's, and we were talking about being impotent in sobriety because neither one of us knew how to have sex sober. You know what I mean? That's not the kind of conversations I have with anybody. You know what I mean? But that's the kind of stuff that transpired. So I was searching for that, and I would drive down back to the Bay Area for 3 hours. I would drive trying to find fellowship, trying to find something going on after the meeting. And not like, there was a lady there, Jeannie, who, God bless her, every time I walked in, she smiled and said hi, Tim. And that saved my life. I mean, I can't tell you what that meant to me sometimes, So around, I guess it was in January of 2010, my mom knew kind of this. I was living in a 12 by 12 trailer. I had an electric cord pulled in for power, and then I had a little propane tank for heat, and I had a TV and a VCR, or DVD player, and I would rent like seasons of Breaking Bad or whatever, and I would just lay there, and I had a St. Bernard at the time, and we would just lay there, and I would just veg out and watch TV and just try to shut out kind of the same thing that I was doing when I was drinking, the pitiful and meaningless, my existence. So she invited me to come out to her house in Arizona, in Phoenix, to do some work on her house. In January, Phoenix, 65 degrees. Where I was living, it was 30 degrees. There's a puddle in front of my little trailer that hadn't thawed out for 2 weeks, and there's fellowship. You know, I went to some meetings, and when she asked me if I wanted to move out, I had to think about it. You know, but I did. I went back and grabbed my stuff, and I stayed in Phoenix for 10 years. Got a sponsor, got a home group, worked steps, didn't do an honest 4-step, left a lot of stuff out. Got to 9th, made the easy ones. Got really caught up in finding a career. You know, I sat in meetings and would hear, I really believed that if I could get her, if I could get the career, if I get the house, get the car, that I'd be happy. I really believe that. And so that's what I set out to do. And stayed in contact, you know, around 4 or 5 years. I got a job that was out of the trades in a corporate kind of thing. And, you know, over the next couple of years, I'd go to meetings sometimes, and it was still the, I was talking with my sponsor at dinner about, I read the book sometimes and I just tear it apart. And I read the book sometimes and I love it. You know what I mean? And I don't know what, I come to meetings sometimes and you guys are my people. I love you. I come to meetings sometimes and who the fuck, you know what I mean? I love Alcoholics Anonymous when I'm doing Alcoholics Anonymous. When I'm not doing Alcoholics Anonymous, you guys are stupid. I don't know what it is. You know, because I would go to meetings and I would hear all the things I'm not doing. And so why do I want to come back? You know what I mean? And that became kind of a pattern. And I wasn't sponsored. I was sponsoring myself. Thank you very much. So I had this career starting, and it was moving up, and I was making more money than I thought was possible. And in 2018, I bought a house, and I had a new car, and I had a cute little girlfriend, and I was going to Europe twice a year. And I celebrated my 10th year of sobriety in Scotland. And I'll be honest with you, I've been to many countries in Europe, and I've never been to an AA meeting over there. Wasn't doing that, didn't go to a meeting for my 10th year in Scotland. And somewhere in that time frame, and I can almost pinpoint it, like, put it this way, 2.5 years ago, I was this close to just blowing my head off, just fucking ending it. I don't know how else to say it. I had acquired all of the things that were supposed to make me happy, and I was as miserable or more miserable than I was when I got sober. And I didn't understand it. But I knew, I've heard this story before. You know, I heard somebody share not that long ago, you know, like with my 4-step. When it gets bad enough, I'll share it. You know, there was always these kind of caveats. So what I did is I got a hold of a guy who had sponsored me and started trying to do what had worked before. I want the higher level AA. I want the next level, you know, it's never is. It's always just show up, you know. And so I will say this, and I don't know if I've ever shared this at a meeting. I worked with him for about 6 months and was still suicidal. So for a little while, and I'm not on them anymore, I got the antidepressant kind of thing. And I don't know why I'm sharing that. I believe for me it was a necessary thing, and I think for some people maybe it is. I've since, because one of the things that with my sponsor that was concerned is that I was going to do this and feel better and not do Alcoholics Anonymous. And that wasn't the case, you know. So I started working with him again, and then in January of 2020, I got a job up here. And how I stayed in Phoenix for 10 years, I will never know. I would visit my mom in the summer, you know, before, and I fucking hate the heat. You know, I grew up in Northern California where if it's 85 degrees, I'm like, I got to go to the beach or something because it's just too hot. And 10 years in Phoenix, but you know what it was? It was a fellowship, I think. But when I got an opportunity to get a job up here, I had a sister that's been up here for about 10 years. I took it, and knowing that I maybe wasn't in the best space. But I come up here in January, start working, and then in March, COVID. But in that time frame, I had found a group that was my home group, and I had made a commitment to do this thing, and I did as best I could during COVID. My sponsor and I would go down to Phoenix every weekend, spend some time with him. You know, there wasn't just, I mean, everything was shut down. I was never a big Zoom guy. And then he moved back to Texas in September of that same year. And I'm in the market for a new sponsor. Now, one of the things that I think is important, and I think in the book it talks about our stories. We talk about, it's important to share how we've made contact or have developed a relationship with power greater than ourselves. Now, you guys don't know me well enough, but there would be people in Phoenix who would laugh when I made that comment, because I am not a God person. And I would say I've been very militantly, defiantly anti-God in Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, fuck you and fuck your God, that kind of attitude, you know what I mean? And it's killed me. And it's not like it's gone. But I will say this, you know, I pray. I think there's an idea of this pronoun that's separate from myself that I rebel against. This idea of being, spirit, higher power, I have no problem with. You know, I get bogged down with the stupidest details. I'm like a squirrel. You know what I mean? Like, but I do, and it's made my sobriety uncomfortable at times, very uncomfortable, because it's a separation. You know, I believe, you know, we are all connected, and I have a lot of that type of very fundamental foundational beliefs, and I am very much a seeker. But there's been that wall. And the point I'm making is, you know, about sometime after my sponsor moved, I feel like I hit my knees and said, and I don't believe, I said a prayer that was as honest as the prayers I've ever said, and I don't know that I would have ever have been able to make that statement before that, was that I'm done. That was my third step, you know, I'm done. It's funny because I've done a lot of third steps over the years, and the last one I did with my sponsor, I bawled like a baby, which is the weirdest thing. But and basically what I said in that prayer was, I can't manage. I cannot manage my own life. I'm sober, no matter what's going on, and asking for some type of help, I guess. Now I don't know. I hear, you know, one of the things that has kind of always bothered me, like I'll hear at a meeting, you know, I prayed for patience, and on the way to work this morning I hit every red light because God's teaching me patience. And I have a visceral reaction to that. Now maybe I'm aware that I need patience, so I'm aware of all of the situations where I'm impatient, and that's what's going on here. Maybe God isn't modifying the universe to teach me a lesson, you know, impacting everybody. You know what I mean? Maybe, I don't know. But when I'm ready, I believe things happen. So long story short, I'm almost out of time here. I was ready for something different. And a few months later, I was actually in this room. It was a little bit over a year ago. And I was looking for a sponsor. And there's a young lady that was speaking here. And she carried a message that had depth and weight. And she talked about the relationship that she had with her sponsor. And she said a term that I think is the most profound thing that I've ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's one voice, no choice. And I say that and I get teary. Because that's been my whole life. You know, one of the things that I remember very clearly when I started drinking again that I loved was I didn't have that. I get in the shower today and I have a fucking committee that just goes, and it's just blah, blah, blah. I wake up and I have my head that just does not shut up. I'm like OCD, and I've learned that that's not the entirety of me, but that's been my whole life. Is I've been driven by that one voice. I've had no choice. And to hear that statement, and to be in a place where I was ready, I thought her sponsor was back where I thought she got sober, and it was a gentleman that's local, and and I embarked upon a journey with this guy. And one of the things that I used to be critical of is like, if you're a grown man and you've been sober for a little while and you're calling your sponsor every day, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? That's the attitude that I had. I talk to my sponsor almost every day for an hour or so. I see my sponsor almost every day. You know what I mean? I try to follow the prescription as he outlines, and I try to take the direction that is given. I wish that I did more to reap the benefits of what you guys have to offer. And, I was talking to the girl that spoke, her name is Angie. I was talking to her a couple weeks ago, and I said to her, and this is not a knock on the sponsors that I've had in the past, but I feel like I'm doing Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time. And I've had good sponsorship, but I don't think I've ever been willing to take the direction that's provided here, that's asked of, And when I think back to the times that I had attempted sobriety before and I knew I wasn't ready, one of the things one of the things that when I was 10, 11 years sober in that year time frame, I would lay awake at night and just feel like I was going insane and screaming out loud, screaming in my bedroom, feeling like I was just going insane at 10 years sober. And I had that exact same feeling that I had the night before I got sober, and for some reason this is important to me, it may not be important to you, that I'm gonna get to the end of my life and I'm gonna look back and it's gonna be an utter waste, and that's just unacceptable. And the idea that I thought if I was sober that would somehow magically not be the case. And I had this awareness that it's not, that I have to do the work. And not that I have to, I get to do the work, I'm getting on a plane in the morning. I have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter that I need to go see, The relationship I have with my son, is always been phenomenal. But when I got sober, I told him, Randy, I'm getting sober, and my whole family kind of thought I was already, but he told me, when I made amends to my mom, she told me that when I was 16, 15 years old, she would come in and check to see if I was still alive at night, still breathing. The conversation I had with my son was very similar to that when I was 40 years old when I got sober, and he felt like he was concerned that you know what I mean? And those are the two people that I love now, my granddaughter too, more than anything, I don't know. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you guys tonight. I can honestly say, whether I feel it or not, which I don't always feel it, everything good in my life is a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if it were up to me, I would have missed it all. So, thanks.